I used to believe exhaustion meant I was doing something meaningful with my life. That's what everyone around me seemed to believe too. In America, being tired almost feels like proof that you matter. If you're stressed, overwhelmed, constantly busy, people assume you're ambitious, productive, successful. So for years, I convinced myself the heaviness inside me was normal. Just adulthood. Just responsibility. Just life. I was 27 years old, living alone in a small apartment outside Boston, working as a financial analyst for a company I never truly cared about. Every morning, my alarm screamed at 6:30 like a punishment I had slowly accepted. I would lie there staring at the ceiling, already exhausted before the day even started, then immediately reach for my phone. Emails, Instagram, news, TikTok, messages from people I barely spoke to in real life. Before I had even fully entered my own day, I was already consuming everybody else's lives. Then came the shower, the overpriced coffee, the traffic, the same office building, the same elevator conversations that somehow never changed. Can't wait for Friday. Weekend went too fast. I need another coffee. Everyone laughed after saying it, but there was always something lifeless behind their eyes. From the 22nd floor of the building where I worked, Boston looked beautiful in a cold, distant way. Steel towers, rivers of headlights, people rushing through crosswalks holding coffee cups and staring at screens. Thousands of lives moving at full speed. But every day, standing there near the office window, I felt this strange emptiness growing quietly inside me. At first, years earlier, I thought this was success. Stable salary, benefits, a retirement plan, the kind of life parents are proud of. But somewhere along the way, stability turned into emotional paralysis. Every day became identical to the last. Wake up, commute, work, scroll, sleep, repeat. And what terrified me most wasn't that I was unhappy. It was that I was getting used to it. Human beings can adapt to almost anything, even emptiness. Especially emptiness. At lunch, my coworkers sat around gray tables discussing promotions, stock prices, dating apps, rising rent, celebrity scandals, and office gossip while checking their phones every 30 seconds. Nobody was ever fully present. Half of every conversation disappeared into notifications. Sometimes I looked around the room and wondered if everyone secretly felt the same thing I did. That invisible sadness modern people carry but never talk about. Because modern loneliness doesn't look dramatic. It looks functional. You still go to work. You still smile. You still answer emails. But internally, something slowly dies. One Thursday night in November changed everything. Rain slammed against my apartment windows while freezing wind rattled the glass. Boston looked ghostly outside, buried beneath fog and streetlights. I sat on my couch in sweatpants surrounded by takeout containers, endlessly scrolling through videos on my phone. A man traveling through Greece. A millionaire giving productivity advice. A couple laughing together on a beach in Italy. Fitness clips. Political arguments. Comedy videos. Motivational speeches from strangers online telling me to unlock my potential. Hours disappeared without me noticing. That's the terrifying thing about distraction. It never feels dangerous while it's happening. It feels comfortable. Then suddenly my phone battery died. The screen went black. Silence flooded the apartment instantly.
No voices.
No music.
No stimulation.
Just me. I remember staring at my reflection in the dark television screen across the room, and for reasons I still struggle to explain, panic rose slowly inside my chest. Not panic from fear. Panic from awareness. The silence forced me to notice things I had spent years avoiding. The apartment was a mess. Laundry covered the bedroom floor. Beer bottles lined the kitchen counter. Books I once promised myself I would read sat untouched on a shelf gathering dust. On my desk were old sticky notes with goals written months earlier. Learn Spanish. Start writing. Travel Europe. Read every morning. build something meaningful. I stared at those notes for a long time because suddenly I realized something horrifying. I had become a spectator in my own life. Every dream I once cared about had been postponed so many times that postponing them started to feel normal. Then the thought entered my mind quietly, slowly, like a knife sliding into water. What if nothing ever changes? Not because life stopped me, not because I failed, but because I kept distracting myself long enough to avoid confronting the life I was becoming. I barely slept that night. The next morning, before work, I checked my screen time report out of curiosity. 9 hours and 14 minutes. That was my average daily phone usage. I stared at the number in disbelief. 9 hours every single day. Almost an entire part-time job spent consuming things I wouldn't even remember a week later. Suddenly I understood why time felt like it was moving so fast. I wasn't actually living most of it. I was anesthetizing myself. That morning, for the first time in years, I called in sick to work. Not because my body was ill, because my soul was exhausted. I spent the day wandering through Boston alone while freezing wind cut through the streets. People rushed past me wearing suits and headphones, talking into wireless earbuds, staring down at glowing screens. Everyone looked mentally somewhere else. At one point, I entered a small coffee shop near Beacon Hill to escape the cold. Soft jazz played overhead while people sat alone with laptops open, typing endlessly without ever looking up. Then I noticed an older man sitting near the window reading a newspaper. No phone.
No headphones. No distractions.
Just present. For some reason, I couldn't stop looking at him. Eventually he glanced up and smiled. "You look tired," he said calmly. I laughed awkwardly. "Long week." He shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. "You look spiritually tired." I still remember how hard those words hit me because nobody had ever described exactly how I felt before. Spiritually tired. Not sleepy. Not overworked. Empty. We ended up talking for nearly an hour. His name was Walter. Retired history teacher. 72 years old. Widower. Lived nearby alone after his wife passed away years earlier. At one point, he folded his newspaper carefully and looked at me. "You know what scares me about young people today?" he asked. I shrugged. "You've mastered distraction so completely that many of you never meet yourselves." I didn't answer because deep down I knew he was right. Walter told me that when he was younger, boredom used to force people into reflection. Silence forced them to confront loneliness, fears, regrets, dreams. "Now," he said quietly, "people escape every uncomfortable feeling before it teaches them anything." That sentence stayed with me long after I left the cafe. That night I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I sat in silence. No television. No music.
No scrolling.
Nothing. At first, it felt unbearable. My mind raced uncontrollably. Anxiety surfaced. Regrets surfaced. Questions surfaced. Was I actually happy? Did I even like the person I was becoming? When was the last time I felt truly alive? The scary thing about distraction is that it protects you from discomfort temporarily while quietly destroying your future permanently. For years, every uncomfortable emotion I experienced had been instantly numbed by stimulation. Lonely? Scroll. Anxious? Watch something.
Sad?
Eat something. Insecure? Distract yourself. My entire generation had become emotionally allergic to silence. And because of that, we rarely changed. Because transformation requires confrontation. A week later, I started waking up early to walk before work. Nothing dramatic.
No motivational montage.
Just me walking through cold streets before sunrise while the city slowly woke around me. At first, those walks felt uncomfortable. But eventually they became the best part of my day. For the first time in years, my mind felt clear enough to think. I started noticing small things again. The sound of birds in the morning, rain on pavement, the way sunlight reflected against windows downtown. I realized I had spent years physically existing somewhere while mentally living somewhere else entirely. One morning during those walks, I passed a construction worker sitting alone outside a diner drinking coffee before sunrise. His face looked exhausted, weathered by years of labor. But he sat there quietly watching the sky change colors with a peacefulness I envied. I remember thinking how strange it was that some people with so little seemed more alive than people with everything. Meanwhile, I had spent years chasing comfort while feeling emotionally hollow. Slowly, I began changing small habits. I deleted TikTok first. That alone felt terrifying. I hadn't realized how addicted I was until I tried removing it. Without constant stimulation, time suddenly felt slower, longer, which meant I finally had space to think. I started reading books again instead of scrolling every night. I cooked meals instead of ordering takeout constantly. I joined a boxing gym in Cambridge and forced myself to attend even when I didn't feel motivated. And something unexpected started happening. I began respecting myself again. Not because my life suddenly became impressive, but because I stopped abandoning myself daily. That's what nobody tells you about confidence. Confidence is not built from compliments. It's built from evidence. Every promise you keep to yourself becomes proof that you can trust your own mind. And for years, I had broken promises to myself constantly. I'll start Monday. I'll wake up early tomorrow. I'll work on my goals next month. I'll change eventually. But eventually is dangerous. Eventually becomes years. Then one day you wake up staring at a life you barely recognize. A few months later, I traveled to New York for a work conference and met up with my old college friend Ryan in Manhattan. Back in college, Ryan had been the kind of guy everyone admired. Funny, fearless, charismatic. He used to talk endlessly about building companies, traveling the world, creating a meaningful life. But when I saw him sitting across from me in a crowded bar that night, he looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. His phone buzzed constantly throughout the conversation. Emails, Slack notifications, dating apps, crypto alerts. He barely finished one thought before glancing down at another notification. At one point, after his phone vibrated again, he muted it aggressively and stared at his drink. Then he said something quietly I'll never forget. Do you ever feel like life is happening around you, but you're not actually inside it anymore? The noise of the bar faded around me when he said that because I understood exactly what he meant. Modern life disconnects people from their own existence. We are constantly stimulated but emotionally absent. Constantly connected but internally isolated. We know what celebrities ate for breakfast yet barely understand our own minds. Later that night, walking alone through Manhattan streets flooded with neon lights and noise, I realized something terrifying. Millions of people were living exactly this way. Busy, distracted, numb, waiting for happiness to arrive later while unconsciously wasting the years meant to build it. A few weeks after New York, my mother called me unexpectedly one evening while I was working late. I almost ignored it. Work had trained me to treat human connection like interruption. Thankfully, I answered. We talked for maybe 15 minutes about ordinary things. Weather, my sister's kids, old family memories, nothing important. But before hanging up, my mother laughed softly and said something that shattered me completely. You know, she said, when you were little, you used to tell me everything. After the call ended, I sat frozen at my desk because suddenly I realized how quickly life was moving. My parents were aging. My sister's children were growing up. Friends were getting married. Time wasn't slowing down. I had simply been too distracted to notice it passing. That night, I cried alone in my apartment for the first time in years. Not because of tragedy, because awareness finally caught up to me. For so long, I had treated life like rehearsal, as if real living would begin someday in the future. After the promotion, after more money, after less stress, after I figured things out. But life was happening now, not later. And every distracted year was a year I could never recover. That realization changed the direction of my life permanently. I stopped obsessing over productivity and started asking deeper questions. What kind of man was I becoming? What actually mattered to me? What memories was I creating? Who would I become if I continued living exactly the same way for another 10 years? Those questions terrified me enough to finally change. Not dramatically, quietly. I started studying Spanish every morning before work for 30 minutes. Just 30 minutes. No grand announcement. No social media posts about self-improvement. Just small, consistent effort. Months passed. Then a year. Eventually, I took my first solo trip to Europe. Barcelona changed something inside me forever. I remember sitting near the beach one evening while an old street musician played guitar nearby as the sky turned orange over the ocean. Couples laughed together. Children ran through the sand. People sat for hours simply talking face to face without staring endlessly at screens. For the first time in years, I felt fully present.
No rush. No notifications.
No pressure to optimize every second. And suddenly I understood how deeply unnatural modern life had become. Somewhere along the way, we turned existence into performance. Everything became content. Everything became productivity. Everything became comparison. People no longer experienced moments fully because they were too busy documenting them. But sitting there listening to music beside the ocean thousands of miles away from my old routines, I felt richer spiritually than I ever had sitting inside expensive office buildings chasing validation I didn't even truly want. That night, walking alone through narrow streets lit by old golden lamps, I realized something simple but life-changing. Attention is life. Whatever owns your attention eventually owns your existence. If distraction owns your attention, your life will feel fragmented. If presence owns your attention, even ordinary moments become sacred. Years ago, I believed changing my life required some massive breakthrough. It didn't. The real transformation began the moment I became honest with myself. I am wasting my life. That sentence hurt my ego deeply, but it saved me because awareness is painful before it becomes liberating. Today, my life still isn't perfect. I still get distracted sometimes. I still procrastinate. I still have anxious nights wondering about the future. But now I notice when I'm disappearing into unconscious habits. And awareness changes everything because once you truly wake up, it becomes harder to betray yourself without noticing the damage. Sometimes I think back to that rainy November night in Boston when my phone battery died and silence filled the room. At the time, it felt uncomfortable. Now I think it may have been the most important moment of my entire life because silence forced me to confront the person I was becoming. And honestly, I think that's what many people are missing today. Not more entertainment. Not another motivational speech. Not another productivity hack. Just silence long enough to hear themselves think again. Because beneath all the scrolling, noise, exhaustion, and distraction, most people already know what's wrong with their lives. They just stay distracted long enough to avoid confronting it. And maybe that's the real tragedy of modern life. Not that people fail, but that many never become conscious enough to truly live before their years disappear.